Hosted by you/throw ice cream. This is the latest in a string of disagreements my wife, 37F, and I, 39M, have been having recently regarding our son, 12M, as he enters his teenage years. I met my wife in youth group before eventually getting married years later, but she's always been the stricter one between us. While I believe in being strict to a point, I think there are times when she has been unreasonably strict, times when I've had to step in and put my foot down. For example, I remember when our son asked to skip youth group one Friday to attend a friend's birthday party. She said no because God is supposed to come first. While I understood her point, I told her she was being unreasonable and that missing an occasional Friday wouldn't hurt. A similar situation occurred on one of his birthdays when he wanted to sleep in, but she wanted him to attend youth group. Again, I told her it wasn't a big deal. Although he was eventually allowed to stay home, she was upset in the car and for most of the time at church. In addition to this, she doesn't want him to have friends who aren't Christians, which has led to one of our bigger arguments. When I asked her why she felt that way, she pointed to mistakes she made after drifting from God following high school. She said she didn't want our son to make the same mistakes. While I understood her concerns, I explained that forcing him to do things he doesn't want to do could backfire and make him resentful later. However, she's convinced that without her strict guidance, he'll turn to drinking and other harmful behaviors, as she once did. She often says those memories haunt her, and she wants to protect him from experiencing the same regrets. The reason I'm writing this is because of our latest argument. She wants him to quit gymnastics, saying that being around a bunch of girls dressed like that is unhealthy and that God wants us to shield our eyes from distractions. She believes the sport offers too many opportunities for him to become lustful in an environment that seems normal. I knew trying to change her mind would be nearly impossible, but I tried anyway. I told her that while she's entitled to her opinion, it doesn't mean others will see things the same way. I explained there's nothing immoral about doing gymnastics, especially since our son is passionate about it. She countered that she didn't want him in an environment with girls of various ages, fearing he might start looking at younger girls inappropriately. This is where I snapped. I told her that while I support her desire to discuss purity with him, she's wrong to impose her religious bias on everything and assume the worst about our son. I also told her she was wrong for viewing gymnastics in such a negative light. She responded by saying she would no longer drive him to gymnastics and that he would stop attending after the current class ends. I told her she was being unreasonable and over the top and that she was setting a distorted example of Christianity for him. The conversation ended abruptly because I had to go to bed for work the next morning, but she insisted on talking to me before I went. While I was at work today, my son called me to share what she had told him, that this would be his last semester in gymnastics and that it was her duty to protect him while he lives under our roof. When I got home, I wanted to discuss it over dinner. I told him he could take his food upstairs, but she insisted we eat at the table. After dinner, she reiterated that her decision was final, arguing that she's the one who has to drive him. When I tried to reason with her, she shut me down. Eventually, I reassured my son that I would handle it and told him not to worry. He seemed relieved, likely because he knows I usually side with him. However, I'm feeling torn. She's the only one available to drive him, as I'm at work during his classes. I'm considering arranging a carpool, but I'm frustrated that it has come to this. My bigger concern is her refusal to renew his enrollment, and I'm thinking about paying for it myself. However, since our finances are combined, I know she'll be upset, and the transportation issue would remain unresolved. I'm open to any advice on how to make this work. I believe she's wrong and that he shouldn't have to quit gymnastics based on her assumptions. However, I also know the deeper issue lies in our marriage. I've suggested counseling, but she refuses to go, so I've been attending alone, which has helped to some extent. I want to make things work, and I understand that her past experiences contribute to her strictness about keeping him close to God. Still, I disagree with her approach and am beginning to question whether I'll ever be able to fully reach her. Update 6 days later. It's been a couple of days since my original post, so I'll get right into it. The short version of last time was that my wife wanted my son to quit gymnastics because she thinks that being around other girls in gymnastics apparel would cause his mind to lust and be ungodly. This is in the aftermath of her talking to him about purity and whatnot. Over the years, I've been too passive about her ways. For example, when she guilted him into wanting to skip a single youth group meeting to go to a birthday party, all under the impression that God is supposed to come first in everything, I didn't push back. She also doesn't want him having friends who aren't Christian because she thinks that will push him further away from God. I consider this a contradiction to the Great Commission in the New Testament. Not that I'm someone who advocates bringing religion into every conversation and coming off as that weird person, but Jesus spent the majority of his time around people who weren't perfect saints, the opposite of what she's mandated. When she tried to force him to skip the party to put God first, I overruled her, taking the easy way out. When he wanted to hang out with friends who weren't necessarily Christians and she threw a fit, I wanted to tell her that judging someone based on an imaginary image in our heads, rather than their actual character, even before meeting them, is a form of prejudice. But again, I took the easy way out and just told him he was fine to keep his friends, even though I believe it shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. I did the same thing regarding the purity talks she wanted to have with him. I agreed and let her have them, although I was rather quiet during the discussion. Now, I regret it and realize how much of a mistake it was for these reasons. Being completely honest, this whole situation that has been brewing for years has made me grow tired of her religious nonsense, and somewhat of religion as a whole, since it can sometimes become a scapegoat for petty beliefs that people want to promote under the guise of something sacred. I think that's very manipulative. For years, I did nothing because the thought of separation and the opinions that would follow from our church, parents, and friends seemed overwhelming, considering how some really view divorce as taboo, even when it's none of their business. But honestly, I don't care anymore. I've been growing more numb to religion over the past few years because of her, and hearing her suggest that our son would look at girls in the very same environment he's grown up in for years in a lustful way just doesn't sit well with me, putting it nicely. She's sexualizing a sport and suggesting our son could become a predator if he stayed, which has resonated more than anything else she's ever done. It also makes me wonder if she doesn't have that kind of mindset herself already. So, what did I do? Before doing anything drastic, I decided to talk to her one-on-one about the matter. I asked if she had anything personal against gymnastics and told her that trying to make him quit would only make him hate us. She replied with something along the lines of how the world has a habit of making everything sexual, and that the gymnastics environment promotes girls in clothing that can easily be looked at wrongfully. She went on about how God wants us to have clean eyes, and so on. When I suggested that perhaps she was projecting her personal problems onto him, which I debated whether it'd be too harsh to say but chose to anyway, she just said no and didn't want to talk about it. I eventually asked if she'd be willing to go to counseling with me, suggesting a professional counselor in our area. She said no. Then I offered talking to someone inside the church, but she became defensive and accused me of trying to embarrass her in front of her friends. I explained that wasn't true and said she wasn't cooperating, even though marriage is supposed to be about working things out. She got upset and said I was wrong for allowing our son to stay in an environment where he'll grow older as younger girls keep coming in, claiming it says a lot about what I'm comfortable with by allowing him to do so. At that point, I was done since I felt she was accusing me of being unfaithful simply because I don't think he should quit gymnastics. Sure, I could talk to other parents and try to arrange a carpool. I could even drive him myself if I could get off work early enough some days. But I can't control what she does at home when I'm not there. She's already talked to him behind my back on numerous occasions while I'm at work, explaining why she wants him to quit. If she doesn't want to talk or cooperate with me, what more can I do? I talked to my son and told him that we'd be going up to my parents' house for the weekend and potentially longer. I was direct in explaining why. I told him again that I'm on his side and that she's sexualizing a sport and minors in a very inappropriate way. I also told him that the last thing we need is to deal with that as he goes into his teen years. I apologized for enabling her for so many years and being afraid of the idea of separation. While I debated whether I should be this direct about explaining everything at his age, I ultimately decided to be honest because I didn't want him to feel I kept things from him as he grew older. I also told him how it was making me stressed at work and unable to focus, which allowed him to open up and tell me that he feels guilty for wanting to stay in gymnastics. I reassured him that he has nothing to feel guilty about. The fact that she made him even have these doubts is something that didn't need to exist in the first place. My parents are now helping me look into a lawyer and ways to comfort him. A lot of this is on me for allowing it to go on for so long, but I just want to know how to help him with the guilt he feels after her words. Besides telling him that I'm on his side and that she's wrong, she's already planted that doubt in him whenever he's in the gym. I just want to help him navigate it the best I can and undo the damage her behavior has caused. As for my wife, she didn't know we had left until after we got there. I told her exactly why we had left, and she was slightly apologetic on the phone. I asked her again if she'd be willing to go to counseling, but she accused me of trying to manipulate her into going. I told her to call back if she had a change of heart. My main priority remains undoing the damage she's done to him, recovering mentally myself, and potentially working through a separation unless she shows she's willing to change, which I doubt, considering we left and she still wouldn't consider counseling. Just being here is more peaceful and much needed after the stress of work and being in that home. Second update 27 days later. It's been almost a month, so I wanted to revisit this. I'm not going to lie, I'm really tired at this point. I wrote a lot the last 2 times, but I don't think I'll do that this time because I'm losing energy over it. Basically, when we were still staying at my parents' house, I told her why we left and said I'd return if she had a change of heart. When we first talked, she refused to budge on her stance that it's inappropriate for him, at his age, to be in the same gym as little kids, particularly girls, from a purity standpoint. She believes that the world has a habit of turning everything that isn't sexual into something sexual, and she thinks the sport just serves as eye candy for lustful people who watch girls run around in leotards, which she often points out. She's even told him this BS while I was at work, and it drove me crazy. I couldn't focus, knowing that in the back of my mind, she was at home telling him things I'd have to undo later. I've mentioned before that much of her behavior is on me for being lax over the years. I'm trying to do better, but it's been incredibly stressful, and it still is, even after almost a month. When we were at my parents' house, we stayed there for a little while, but she started telling her parents and mutual friends false things about me. This led to her parents and some of them calling or messaging me on her behalf, accusing me of being a bad husband, among other things. She even claimed I kidnapped our son and made other accusations, including that I put my hands on her once, which I swear has never happened, not even when we discussed counseling. My parents told me that she was trying to guilt me into returning under her terms and that I should stay with them because she had truly gone off the rails. So, we've been staying with my parents ever since. I've taken a leave from work because my mind hasn't been in a good place for over a month. Everything that happened at our house, the new lies, the stress my son is feeling, finding a lawyer, and researching legal options with my parents has taken a huge toll. It's consumed a lot of my parents' time too, but they've been amazing, and I want to thank them properly when this is all over, or even before then. Between talking to the police and organizing documentation for them and my lawyer, I'm exhausted right now, and so are my parents. We're all still trying to figure this out, knowing it will likely be a long process. I don't care how much it costs to debunk her lies and get us both into therapy. My son, however, doesn't want to go. I told him, along with my parents, that he could go with me or alone if he wanted to, and that we weren't forcing him. He said he didn't want to at the moment, so we've left it for now. I've started talking to a therapist online in my spare time, and my parents are helping me pay for it a little. However, my son doesn't want to do gymnastics anymore. He's hard on himself for everything that's transpired, despite me and my parents reassuring him many times that none of it is his fault. I've taken responsibility for letting her behavior spiral over the years, but he's shown no desire to return to gymnastics. He's voiced guilt about being around girls and making them uncomfortable, even though he wasn't doing anything wrong. I told him that his mom put those ideas in his head and that they're not true, but I regret going along with her desire to teach purity and keeping us in a church that ostracizes people, like the girl I mentioned in a comment who was shamed for having a termination. That same church is now spreading her lies about me, and I have no intention of ever returning there. Regarding his schooling, that's another mess. He hasn't been attending class because she's contacted the school as well. My lawyer thinks it's best to hold off on sending him back for the time being, both for his well-being and because she might show up there. However, he wants him to return sooner rather than later, and I do too. I'm looking into whether he can complete most of his work online, but I'm still working on that. Most importantly, I'm trying to encourage him to speak to a professional about his feelings, someone who can help him in ways that I can't, and to support him until he decides to take that step. From a mental standpoint, he feels guilty, not just about what happened with his mom but also because of the things she said about him lusting after girls without realizing it at gymnastics. I don't want him developing a complex over her nonsense. My main priority now is getting a divorce after this final straw. I can't take it anymore, and I don't know how much longer this will continue. It'll probably take a while, but he's tired of gymnastics, he's not in a good state, and my parents believe he should see someone sooner rather than later. I'll probably make him go at some point, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to do so without making him feel forced, resentful, or unwilling. If anyone has advice on how to approach this in a way that encourages him to go without upsetting him, I'd really appreciate it. It hasn't been easy on him, and I just want this nightmare to be over. I'm aware this is the consequence of letting small things slide over the years, which have now escalated into something huge. But if we can come out of this all right, I hope we'll both somehow be stronger in the end.